Hi everyone. Today I would like to talk about something that's been on my mind for a while, to be honest. Because I started noticing that the language that I knew intimately and that I was taking for granted started slipping away from me. And I would like to discuss what I'm planning to do about it. Recently, I saw a video on one of the channels that I follow about language learning because I'm generally quite fascinated about the different languages. And the presenter shared quite an interesting idea, but I'm not really sure I really buy it. Basically, they mentioned that in any language, if you reach a level of B2, it is very unlikely that you will ever lose this language, that it will stay with you forever. Why I disagree with it? Because Russian is my native language. But recently I started noticing that it's literally slipping away from me. And sometimes when I have conversation in Russian with my family members or with some of my friends with whom I still communicate in Russian, I am struggling to find certain words just because I don't really use them. But language is not only about communication, because when you speak a different language, you open windows to different worlds, to different cultures. You're connecting with different people. And when you speak their language, you don't just communicate, you don't just exchange words, you're connecting on a much, much deeper level. And you access to their humor, to their cultural references, and you can build the stronger connection with these people. And I've always believed that language is a tool, pure and simple, beautiful tool, and it should be unaffected by politics, by current geopolitical tensions and events. But the thing about a language use, it's like a muscle. And if you don't use this muscle, they start atrophy. And this is what I experience myself firsthand at the moment. Because, as already mentioned, sometimes when I have a conversation with my family members, because my family members don't speak English, or if I have a conversation with some of my Russian friends, I struggle to find certain words. And especially when I speak with my mom, I find myself embarrassed sometimes because I see that she starts correcting me. And this is my native language. Isn't it embarrassing? And I had this conversation with some of my bilingual friends that moved to the UK at some point, and they probably don't use their native language as much as they would like to, just because of lack of opportunities, or maybe they just do it intentionally, like in my case, for instance, because everything I read is in English. I watch everything in English. And my language skills, my Russian language skills, are atrophying just because I use Russian only in very limited circumstances. When I have some basic conversations with, let's say, my family members, but they're not so deep or vary in their themes. And at some point, you just notice that you pretty much use the same words. And if you want to say something different, you're struggling to find correct words. And when I had this conversation with my friends, they told me that many of them have the same issue. When you reach this point in your language learning journey, when you realize that your new acquired language probably will never be on a native speaker's level just because you started acquiring it probably a bit later in life, and you will always retain the accent, and maybe your vocabulary is fine, but you still make a few mistakes here and there. But at the same time, you start noticing that your native language is actually leaving you, and you find yourself in this sort of limbo when you're not fully proficient on native level like in any of these languages. And for me, it is like watching part of me fading away, because sometimes when I have this conversation, I'm really trying to reach for this Russian word, but I can't find it. Or maybe I can find an English alternative, or maybe just a void. And therefore, I decided to do something about it before it gets so bad that it will be very difficult for me to reverse it. And especially because I had this very interesting conversation with the shop assistant in a big shop in Antalya in Turkey about this particular issue. It is a very, very nice, absolutely wonderful bookshop in Antalya with lots of Russian books. They are pretty much catered to Russian speaking clientele just because they have a very large population of Russian speakers in Antalya. And the shop assistant told me that the one she had a very interesting client. That lady came from Germany. She was staying for a holiday in Antalya, and she went deliberately to this particular bookshop, as I did myself, to find some books in Russian just because she moved to Germany a long time ago and she never really had a chance to use her native language, and she pretty much forgot it. And she realized that she can't speak to people and she can't really read anything in Russian just because it's so rusty that she doesn't really remember much of it. I don't want to find myself in this situation in the future when I'll be struggling with my native language. As a result, I would like to introduce some Russian books on my channel. It doesn't mean that I will be reading only books in Russian, but I will be picking up a few books in Russian from time to time. And I really hope you will be interested in it because I do it primarily for my own sake, just to keep my language alive. But at the same time, I really hope you will find it interesting and maybe let me know if there are certain books you would like to know. Because in my case, for instance, I grew up pretty much on Russian classics. My school program was very, very heavily driven by Russian classics. I read pretty much all very famous Russian classics books, but the great thing about getting older that you probably forgot many things you read while you were at school, just because so much time passed. And you can safely reread them because you just don't remember them. I have a few Russian books in my library, not many to be honest. I have quite a few books by Strugatsky brothers. I've read two of them, but I'm not really sure I'm a big fan of them. I know that they're very famous and very popular, but probably just not my type of stories. I do have War and Peace in Russian, and I have a few collection of short stories, but I'm planning to buy a few more books. And probably some of the books that I'll be reading will be Russian classics, but some will be contemporary works, so I can introduce these works to other people. And another very interesting thing that I actually would like to discuss with you, I'm not sure if you will agree with me, and maybe I'm slightly biased, but I don't really think that it's actually coming from the bias, but I think it's coming from lack of exposure because it's something unusual for me as well. When I checked some books in a big bookshop where I'm actually checking Russian books from time to time, I have quite a big section of foreign language literature there, and they have quite a few shelves with Russian books. And every time I check them, I find it very interesting because in many of the cases, I find covers for Russian books actually more interesting than UK covers. I'll put three examples here now. Obviously, there are not so many because there is a limited selection there generally, and majority of it is actually Russian classics. But there are a few books there that you can actually pick, and they're not by Russian authors, but translated literature. And for instance, this is Maud by Terry Pratchett. I put here our cover, British cover, and the Russian cover. What do you think about it? I don't know. I think British cover is just more familiar to me, but this Russian cover is very, very interesting. I really actually like it. Next one is Butter by Saki Uzuki. British cover, Russian cover. What do you think? I think Russian cover is much more artsy. And The Vegetarian by Han Kang. What do you think about it? And another interesting thing that I noticed about Russian covers in comparison with the UK or the US covers, I know that in the UK and the US probably it is the same as far as I know. The cover designs are printed on the dash jacket if you are buying a hardback. But on Russia, if for instance you're buying a hardback, the design will most likely be printed on the hardback itself because not many of them actually using those covers. For majority of the hardback editions, you actually have the design on hardbacks, and this is my preferred way personally. Because I feel when the design on the dash jacket and the hardback is just plain and boring, it is sort of probably cheaper way of printing books just because you don't really need to make every hardback beautiful. But I think it's so much nicer when you actually have the design of the book on the hardcover itself. Please let me know what's your preference. But for me, for instance, if I could choose, I would really like to have the design being printed on the hardback itself. So, yes, this is what I wanted to discuss today because I feel I started losing this connection to a very big part of myself, to my native language. And I really would like to rekindle it and probably have more fun with it on the way. And I really hope you will like this project as well. And I'm generally amazed at polyglots when people speaking 4, 5, and more languages, how they're not losing connection with these languages. How can they remember everything? So do please let me know if you have the same issue or what you think generally about this sort of things. And I would like to discuss it with you. See you soon. Bye.